Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, both now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. Good evening, everyone. God bless. Thank you for coming. As we know, this is our Orthodoxy 102 offering here at St. Basil's, where at different points in time during the year, we like to do short lecture series of typically 2 or 3 sequentially in a row on a common theme. What we're going to be focusing on first here tonight and then the next 2 Wednesdays as well is under the theme of America's Christian foundations, or America's Christian roots. So what I would like to do here tonight, if it sounds good to everyone else, is lay a little bit of a foundation for that conversation and a bit of a reference point for it, and how we're going to try to attack this topic, how we're going to try to engage it, and what can be the basis of our conversation. I like to keep things relatively relaxed at the same time, but perhaps it might be better if you let me work through developing a couple of thoughts, and then we can enter into a bit of a dialogue. Does that sound okay? Good enough? And we'll try to cap it at about an hour or so total. That sounds okay to everyone. It wasn't so long ago I had an interaction with an Orthodox priest who is from Australia. And when I was chatting with him, he got a smirk on his face as I was speaking. I said, "What's that all about?" And he said, "I love you Americans, you're so idealistic." And I said, "Oh, here we go. Here we go, right? Do you want me to tell you about Australia?" But before I bit my lip or anything else, he said, No. I say it from a good perspective. I said, "Okay, tell me what you have to say about us." He said, "I love you Americans, you're idealistic because that's your root as a society and as a nation. You were founded on the principle of an ideal. And that's unique," he said. "Most other nations, most other countries were founded just simply on the basis of ethnicity, of borders, of domination, of oppression, so on and so forth." He says, "But what's unique about you guys is that you were founded based upon the experience of an ideal." And I thought about that for a while, and that has stuck with me over the last several years, and it seems to inform a lot of my thought process now when I look at current day America, and specifically as I look backwards and look at our history as well too. I thought that it was a very, very insightful comment by my brother priest from Australia. But the notion of a society being founded and built upon an ideal isn't completely unique or new to just the United States. The one highlighted example that I would like to offer, and it's the only one that's very, very pointed that I can come up with in history, comes from ancient Greece. I'm speaking about, of course, Alexander the Great. And I want to reference this to show that it's not a new concept of a nation being founded upon an idea. It's something that came to us all the way back from the early days of what we now refer to and recognize as Hellenism. And Alexander the Great, I believe, articulates it beautifully in his famous speech titled Alexander's Oath at Opus, which took place in 324 BC. It's very short. Let me read it for you. Alexander says, after a long war, "It is my wish, now that wars are coming to an end, that you should all be happy in peace from now on. Let all mortals live as one people, in fellowship for the good of all. See the whole world as your homeland, with laws common to all, where the best will govern regardless of their race. Unlike the narrow-minded, I make no distinction between Greeks and barbarians. The origin of citizens or the race into which they were born is of no concern to me. I have only one criterion by which to distinguish them: virtue. For me, any good foreigner is a Greek, and any bad Greek is worse than a barbarian. If disputes ever occur among you, you will not resort to weapons, but will solve them in peace. If need be, I shall arbitrate between you. See God not as an autocratic despot, but as the common father of all, and thus your conduct will be like the lives of brothers within the same family. I, on my part, see you all as equal, whether you are white or dark-skinned, and I should like you not simply to be subjects of my commonwealth, but members of it, partners of it, to the best of my ability. I shall thrive to do what I have promised. Keep as a symbol of love this oath which we have taken tonight with our libations. So many things to take away and learn here by the words and the promise and oath of Alexander the Great, not the least of which being that he did it with libations, because anything good, right, should have a libation associated with it. But he's speaking here about this principle, this experience of Hellenism, as being something that is bound by what? A common investment in virtue. That's an idea. That's an idea. So this beautiful experiment turned into phenomenal experience of mankind called the United States of America, which was founded upon an ideal we see rooted many, many centuries before, 2,100 years before the Declaration of Independence and Alexander's oath at Opus. So I think that it's important to see that although this is unique, there is a precedent in the past for it as well too. Let's move a little bit into this idea of America. What is the idea? I'll start first with reading a little bit from the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. Allow me to read the beginning. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So the Declaration of Independence, right off the bat, starts laying the framework of whenever you get to the point where you have to have separation, it should be done in a decent way, but according to what? It's not just according to someone's feelings, to someone's desires, to whatever makes them happy at that point in time. The framers of the Declaration, put in there right away that there is an ultimate experience that we're accountable to, that we're bound to. Let me read it again. The separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. So we can only go as far as God has entitled us to go. There's a boundary there for us, something that we're accountable to. And then he goes on a little bit further to the part of the intro that most people are familiar with, hopefully familiar with. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've heard those words before, but what do they actually mean? Right from the initiation of the Declaration of Independence, our founding document, we see what? That the founders are establishing that our rights, the rights of the citizens, the people that comprise this great nation, are provided to us by God, not by government. God provides rights to the people. And then the role of government is to ensure that the rights that God has provided to the individuals, to the people, are safeguarded. That they're allowed to be expressed, to be experienced, to be developed, to be grown. And so government then ends up being constructed, established, utilized, experienced, not to determine for us what our rights are, but to protect the natural rights that we've been given by God Himself. Does this make sense? It's a great differentiation from the way that we seem to be governed today. It's affirmed several times. Allow me to give a couple of references here. Thomas Jefferson states, "The purpose of government is to protect those rights already endowed upon human beings by God, not to determine the rights." One of the greatest minds in our nation's history lays it out for us quite clearly. Government doesn't establish anything. Government is to exist to protect what God has established and provided by His grace. It's then later affirmed, of course, in the Constitution. If we look at the preamble of the Constitution, again, the words at the very beginning that hopefully are familiar to everyone. "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." What's being said right at the initiation, the beginning of our nation's Constitution? We, the people, are putting this forth. This experience is being developed here. Why? To form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty. It's a further recognition that liberty, freedom, has already been given to us by God. But now we're creating a governmental construct that will actually safeguard and protect that so that it can be experienced by everyone. Understanding this relationship and this role of government in the minds of our nation's founders is of epic importance, and I think something that isn't taught the way that I would hope that it should. Excuse me. We'll continue. But government isn't enough, the founders go on. Just having these rights that are provided by God to everyone, and then having a government that's in place to protect those rights and to provide an environment, create an environment where we can express and develop those rights of liberty and freedom, that's not enough. The founders go on to recognize time and time and time again that that governmental experience has to be coupled together with a moral citizenry. If there is not a moral citizenry, the Constitution means nothing. It doesn't work. And so in order to have this exceptional experience, this experience of excellence, which is the United States of America, we have to have a government built upon these principles found in our founding documents, together with a citizenry that has bought into the same thing that Alexander the Great spoke about 2,100 years before the Declaration of Independence, a citizenry that is invested in virtue, that is invested in morality. Let me reference once again the Declaration of Independence. I'll just keep reading from where I left off. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. What our founders are saying in the Declaration of Independence is what? That the citizenry has to be guided by, has to be bound by this investment into common virtue, this investment into morality, and that is of a higher standard to us than the standards that are provided to us by a government which has no purpose other than to protect the space for us to be able to express the rights given to us by God Himself. And if the government starts stepping outside of those bounds, what do our founders say? The citizenry, which is bound, accountable, and empowered by something more than government, by morality, needs to rise up and replace that government so they can get back to doing the job of the ideals which they're articulating in our founding documents. Epic importance. George Washington nation's first and, dare I say, best president, speaks to this. He says, virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. Spring, not like doing, not that type of spring, but wellspring, a source of life, right? Without a virtuous or a moral society, government doesn't work. Not the way that government was constructed by our founders. Okay? Not the way that was constructed by our founders. So therefore, liberty is not the ability to do whatever someone wants. Liberty rather carries a great weight with it. Freedom carries with it a phenomenal weight because it brings with it moral demands and boundaries. Think about that for a moment. Just because we're free to do whatever we want as per perhaps governmental regulations does not mean that as a moral citizenry that we still do it. We have to be bound by a common morality, or by at least an experience of morality in and of itself. Benjamin Franklin has his famous rule of life, which the founders seem to really adhere to and adapt to in terms of their formation of government. When Ben Franklin says, nothing brings more pain than too much pleasure. Nothing more bondage than too much liberty. Right? It's the little kid that after Halloween, his parents don't take away the bag of candy. He's free to eat whatever he wants. He wolfs down the entire pillowcase full of all of that candy, and what happens? He pays the price. Not only does he have a stomach ache for the next 24 hours, but he has a drill in his mouth at the dentist's office pretty soon as well, too. Spare the rod, spoil the child. We've heard that before, of course, from the book of Proverbs. Too much freedom, no good. It goes back to this expression that we have from ancient Greek wisdom, everything in moderation. But once again, it's not government's role then to dictate, as per the founders, it's not government's role to dictate to us where our boundaries are. Rather, it's our morality that dictates to us where our boundaries are as a citizenry. Much, much higher standard to which you and I and everyone is called to in the society established by our founders. So therefore, absolute freedom, unrestrained, is a threat to freedom itself. Morality is absolutely a necessity. Government ensures liberty and freedom. Morality protects that experience from the results of its own absolute expression. Morality comes from a source. It's not dreamt up, and it doesn't come from the source that is commonly thought today, which is individual feelings. Morality does not come from our feelings. It doesn't come from our immediate short-term desires. Morality comes from religion. And for our founders, that source was Judeo-Christian ethics. Right? That was their experience, and that's what they drew on. They didn't have an expectation that everyone in the citizenry had to be a Christian. They didn't have an expectation that everyone in the citizenry had to at least be spawned out of a Judeo-Christian experience. However, the morality associated with Judeo-Christianity was the morality that they used as the baseline to guide the citizenry and to keep it bound. That was their source that they used to initiate and draw standard for the virtues that Alexander the Great was speaking about in 324 BC. Samuel Adams. He's commonly thought of today as just the guy on the beer label. However, if you read actually our history, you see that he was much, much more. Allow me to share a couple of his quotes. He says, "Let divines and philosophers, statesmen and patriots unite in instructing citizens in the art of self-government. In short, of leading them in the study and practice of the exalted virtues of the Christian system. This isn't something that we look at and we say, oh my goodness, our founders must have all been phenomenally faithful Christians and all sitting in the pews each and every Sunday. Not all of them were. Some of them were, but not all of them were. However, we can responsibly extrapolate from the writings of our nation's founders that they understood that this experience of morality, a morality rooted in religion, because that's the vehicle that teaches the mind, the will of God to the people, that morality is a necessity in order for a society to thrive. Even Thomas Jefferson, who is not regarded as the most religious man in our nation's history, Thomas Jefferson realizes this with a sense of absoluteness. Thomas Jefferson states, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift from God, and that they are not to be violated without his wrath?" And so I share that because I don't want us to think that this is a presentation and a discussion ultimately about how all of our nation's founders were saints. That's not the conversation. Unfortunately, to me, that's not even an interesting conversation. What is interesting to me and what is pertinent to all of us is how this group of founders recognized that being rooted in a Christian ethic, that being rooted in Christian morality is a must to be coupled with the government that they formed in order for our society to thrive. Continue to look at some other quotes here that exhibit that relationship and also share warnings for what can take place if that relationship is ever severed. James Madison, "The belief in a God all-powerful, wise, and good is essential to the moral order of the world and to the happiness of man." No order, no happiness, unless we have that Christian ethic. John Adams, "The doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe was the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization." He goes on, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Think about that for a moment. And perhaps that quote right there embodies what I'm attempting to convey tonight more than anything else. The government that was established by our founders, that government only works at its optimum level, only produces to its full potential if it's coupled with a citizenry that is moral. If we remove morality from the citizenry of the people, then the government established by the founders cannot work. It's inadequate. It was only set up to work with a group that buys into common virtue, with a group that is moral. Dare I say that America, established by our founders, is probably the closest representation to true Hellenism since Alexander the Great. John Adams goes on, think about this. We've seen what takes place on our university campuses today, right? Speakers getting assaulted or the threat of assault, people throwing things at them if they don't like their political dialogue or if they bring up morality, things of that nature. Back in the days of our founders, people would write letters to the president. And more often than not, if it was a substantive letter, it would be responded to in a substantive way. Right? Thomas Jefferson, after having received a letter from a large Baptist church in Connecticut, wrote them a letter and then decided that his response was so important he had to deliver it in person. So he traveled all the way to Danbury and he read the letter to the congregation in response. Could you imagine the President of the United States doing that? if I wrote a letter to President Trump about something and he says, you know what, Father Luke, I'm not going to tweet back to you. I'm not going to email you back. This is so important. I'm going to travel to the energy corridor and I'm just going to deliver the whole message to the congregation, right? That's what used to take place. Well, John, we had a full house. Yeah. John, it depends if we were in Harris County or not as to what the House, how they would respond. John Adams received a letter from university students once, and in his response to them, there's a phenomenal quote. He says, "Science, liberty, and religion have an inseparable union. Without their joint influence, no society can be great, flourishing, or ever happy." Right? Morality. It's an essential. It's a primary element. Without it being there, then the America established by our founders doesn't work. Thomas Jefferson, once again, the doctrines of Jesus are simple and tend all to the happiness of man. So even someone who was not the most reverent individual in the world understood that it was important to teach the citizenry that adapting to a Judeo-Christian moral ethic will allow you to thrive and find true happiness in the society that they were forming. Now, we also have founders that warned about the antithesis of that. What happens if we get rid of that moral part of the equation? Alexander Hamilton, in reference to the French Revolution, which was bloody and it was nasty, offers the following quote: "The anti-religious force it unleashed annihilates the foundations of social order and true liberty, confounds all moral distinctions, and substitutes for the mild and beneficent religion of the gospel a gloomy, persecuting, and desolating atheism." Let me read that again. It is a powerful, powerful quote. Hamilton's looking at the French Revolution and what took place there, and he states, "The anti-religious force it unleashed annihilates the foundations of social order and true liberty, confounds all moral distinctions, and substitutes for the mild and beneficent religion of the gospel with a gloomy, persecuting, and desolate atheism." So what he's referring to here is that if you remove a moral buy-in and investment from the citizenry, government cannot complete the picture for you, for me, for anyone to be able to live, experience, express, grow all of those gifts that God has given to us. And what ends up taking place? A gloomy, persecuting, and desolate experience of atheism, where you take out that moral expression and experience. Perhaps maybe we can see some parallels. So therefore, for the founders, a free society divorced from religion could not relate or work at all, and it wouldn't survive. Not coupled with the society, with the government that they were establishing. So you remove the moral society, and there's going to be a complete breakdown with the government that they established. President Washington, in his farewell address from the office of the presidency, because as we know, George Washington served 2 terms. At the beginning of his 2nd term, he announced that he would be retiring at the end of that term. He could have very easily become a monarch in the United States, but he recognized that that was not in line with what they were establishing here in this new land. So he announced that he's going to step down. In his famous speech, the farewell to the office of the presidency, his farewell address, he addresses those that claim to be patriots, but then they undermine the influence of religion in society. So even back then, during these founding times, you had the individuals that today we would call woke or progressive. And he states to them, that you think that you can be a patriot, you think that you can be one that promotes the experience, the expression of America that we're establishing here, and be absent of religious, moral experience, here's his quote to them. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the virtue of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, those firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. Wasn't it great when politicians spoke with substance instead of just back doors so that they can get out of being accountable to what they said? So, our founders, I believe, recognize that there is value to a secular government. However, there is no value to secular society. And a secular government must be coupled with a moral society, morality established and taught and supported by religion in order for the full experience of America to take place. Allow me just a couple of short reflections on our nation's first and my favorite president, George Washington. I have hanging in my office a beautiful framed print of George Washington at the Prayer Valley Forge. Are we familiar with that? Prayer Valley Forge. He's next to his horse. There's snow on the ground, and he's down on his knees. And the story goes that the Revolutionary Army was in tatters. They were bordering on famine. He even states in one of his diaries that they are half naked and hungry, but that they still inspire him, that they haven't taken to mutiny because they buy into the ideal. And it was common for George Washington, General Washington, President Washington, to be seen retreating from the camp by himself without even any guards so that he could find peace, solitude, quiet to enter into prayer while they were at war. And the story goes that he was seen by a passerby that lived in the area, kneeling down next to his horse praying. And when that passerby went home, he went to his family, and the quote is, "I know the Americans will succeed, for their leader did not trust in his own strength, but sought aid from the hearer of prayer, who promised in his holy word, 'Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me.'" We know that George Washington looked at it as a necessity for the armies to always have chaplains. So from the very beginning of our nation's history, there was always an experience of our soldiers having a resource of religion present for them at the battlefield. And we even know that there were times where they were absent a chaplain, and he himself would establish worship services for the soldiers. It's said that George Washington would retire a minimum of twice a day to solitude so that he may go down on his bended knee and pray. His mother, it said, gave him 3 prayer books and the family Bible, which he always kept with him. And he would use the prayer books that were provided to him by his mother when he was on his bended knee. And it's said that there was more than one occasion where he was meeting with the head of another state, and in the middle of the meeting, he would excuse himself, retire to his private quarters, so that he may attend to his prayer life before returning to the meeting as well too. What phenomenal discipline. We also know that Washington was a churchgoer. It's said that he was rooted and came out of an Anglican experience, but we know that he would frequently worship at multiple different Christian churches in terms of their jurisdiction or expression. Multiple Protestant churches and also Roman Catholic churches as well too. We know that he and Martha had sponsored pews at churches outside of Mount Vernon. We even know that as a young man, for a period of years, he also sponsored and purchased all the communion wine for the churches that he would go to as well. So he was a good steward. George Washington, from 1762 all the way until 1784, was uplifted and accepted to be a vestryman and also a church warden of the communities where he would worship at. Vestryman was typically a council of people that were uplifted that would oversee what we would call today the business of things, the investment, so on and so forth. And as a church warden, where he served as well too, for multiple terms, that was the individuals that would take care of day-to-day maintenance and operation of the church facility. And so, not just for a year, not just because he wanted to put it on his resume and look good, but from 62 to 84, he served in these roles. In closing, allow me one more quote from Washington's farewell address. It was 1796 in his farewell address to the country, where he announced that he was going to retire at the end of his second term. And Washington reminds his countrymen that not even a good education can make up for a lack of religion in people's lives. He says, and I quote, "Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle." Our society needs religion. Without it, what the founders established, they tell us themselves, cannot work. So I close with that, and I open it up if there's any questions or comments or something that we can enter into a little bit of dialogue on this topic.
Yeah. I read a book, and each chapter covered the religious beliefs of the founding fathers. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. And it mentioned that George Washington never took communion. I don't know whether that's true or not, if you had heard that.
Yeah, I've read about that before. There's different theories about that. In the Anglican Church during that period of time, it was common that Eucharistic services would only take place 3-4 times a year. And we know that he was a regular participant, and as I said, he would even sponsor and purchase all the communion wine for the churches that he attended as well too. It is said that following the Revolutionary War, that he stopped receiving communion. There's different theories as to why. Some people theorize that men that are faced with the horrors of war get altered sometimes. Sometimes taking on a mentality that they've been abandoned in some way. Other times it's the opposite reaction, saying, why am I still here? I'm too fortunate. I don't deserve this. And it's a form of self-punishment then to not receive as well. So there's been some theorists that have gone down those tracks. There's another theory, I believe it was in Philadelphia, that there was a minister that publicly admonished George Washington in church because he was leaving sometimes, either right before or right after communion was administered, as did a lot of people. You ever been to St. Basil's on Sunday? Right after communion. And so the minister publicly admonished him, even though it wasn't just him, it was a large group. And so George Washington publicly apologized for setting a bad precedent and a bad example, and from that day forward refused to attend church during a Eucharistic service. So some theorists say that's what propelled it. We don't know. We don't know. But what we do know is even after the Revolutionary War, he still was a churchgoer. When he lived at Mount Vernon, they say that he would commonly go to church once, if not twice a month. But it was with a horse and wagon. They say it was 16 or 24 miles to the two churches that he would commonly go to. And that was about an hour-and-a-half trip each way. And so even in his old age and in extreme pain, because he was a man that lived with phenomenal pain, he would still take on that journey in a horse and wagon so that he could be present for communal prayer on a regular basis. What else?
Question. If you believe in the premise, believe in Jesus, believe in God, you're a good Christian, but morality changes. There are other aspects of morality that change with each generation. And then you have the concept of democracy and the majority rules. And you get into today's society where personal fulfillment is very, very important.
Yeah.
And you can give a million different examples, but a simple one, gambling.
Okay.
There's a bunch of others.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that in terms of morality?
Yeah, I think
Are you
I
a good
think
Christian?
that I would go back to what you said at the beginning, saying that morality changes. I would disagree. I would say that morality, if we understand its source as being the teachings of God, morality doesn't change, but the expressions of it can change, right? Because we know from Ecclesiastes there's nothing new under the sun, right? Some of us know it because of the birds. Others of us know it from Ecclesiastes, the Old Testament. We also know that Jesus Christ, who is the Word of God, was the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so if morality is delivered to us by God's Word, and then it is the vehicle to deliver that to us is religion, is the church, I would say that the morality doesn't change, but the ways that we can express our morality can change based upon societal dynamics, experiences, so on and so forth. An example would be, we're always called to love one another. The way societally that a husband would have expressed his love for his children 2,000 years ago is different than the way that a husband, a father, would express the love for his children in 21st century America, probably. Still called to love, which means be self-sacrificial for the good of that individual, but the expression of it probably would have been a lot different 2,000 years ago than today. So that's one example. Vice, which is essentially what you're talking about, gambling or whatever else, there's some very potent vices that exist. And I think that they're perhaps, not that vice is anything new, it's not, it's always been there. There was gambling taking place in Jesus' time and before, right? We didn't start rolling dice in the 80s. And so vice has always been there, but I think that some dynamics associated with today's society make vice even more dangerous. And it's because in today's society we have instant access to almost anything that we want. So there's not much of a buffer zone for us anymore to stop, pause, contemplate, struggle with the moral decision before we're able to act upon it if we want to. Let's use pornography as an example, right? Pornography is a rampant experience in today's society, rampant. Several generations ago, the teenage boy might have had it on his mind, and he had to wait until he got home, wait until his parents were on the other side of the house, sneak into his father's locker, and dig for the girly magazine, right? So there was probably quite a few moments, if not hours, of buffer zone to at least provide the opportunity of a struggle to say, I'm going to grapple with morality here. Not going to get it right all the time, but I have an opportunity that's kind of built in by my own limitations of access that I can grapple with it. Now, there's none of that. There's this. There's instant access to it and anything else that you want immediately. So on this thing right here, if I or you or any teenage kid or anybody else wants pornography, depending on how fast your internet is, you've got it definitely in less than a minute. So where's the buffer zone? Where is the experience for us to be able to grapple with our moral struggle? If you want to gamble, log on, right? Plug in your credit card, you're good to go, right? You're good to go. If you want to steal, hey, if you can hack a little bit, even with this, You can get into my bank account for sure, and anybody else's as well too. Go ahead and steal. You can do whatever you want. So I think that vice is particularly dangerous for us today because we have such instant access to everything, good and bad. So I mean, the access is wonderful in a lot of respects, but it's terrible in others as well too. And so I think that we have to be perhaps even more vigilant and more proactive to teach morality now than we ever have before, because there isn't that buffer associated with access anymore. So we probably have to go even heavier on the proactive thought process. So now there's not a few hours to grapple with my moral decision. Now I've only got 30 seconds to grapple with it. So I need a little bit more on the front end to inform me for a good decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but also getting away from vice a little bit, getting back to your point about government. Government seems to distance itself from morality more and more, separate itself from religion, and does want to give you that gratification. The rockets, we were joking about that. I mean, in business you have ethics. Well, is it ethical to agree to what's going on in China because you make a financial gain as a basketball team?
Right. And that's where we get into what the founders were stating over and over and over again. I tried to articulate tonight. It doesn't work. The society that they're establishing, the government that they're establishing, it doesn't work unless there's a moral citizenry underneath it, or coupled together with it. Okay? I'll share an example. I have a peer who's a priest on the West Coast that grew up in Romania, under communist Romania. And he told us that when the communists came into Romania, one of the first things that they did is they put all state-sponsored youth activities on Sunday mornings. They hadn't gone around and killed priests yet and wiped out religion by force. So what they first did was something very sneaky. You want your kid to get access to all these great government programs that we have? It's Sunday morning, which means, oh, sorry, you can't make it to church. Because the thought process was, if we can eradicate religion from one generation, we're good. Because it doesn't work without a moral citizenry to have a government that provides or ensures, not provides, God provides, a government that ensures and protects liberty and freedom. So now what does the government have to do? Now they have to be the source that teaches you what your rights are and tells you what you can and you can't do. And so that's an example from Mr. Marx and Mr. Lenin and all of these characters. And I think that as we're seeing trends in our own society as well today too, and we love to put labels on things, most of the time I think it's dangerous because we don't earn our knowledge today the way that we should. So we throw around labels as if we know what we're talking about, and most people have no clue what they're talking about. 15 minutes of internet assembled wisdom doesn't do much. And so I think if we can look at the trends, we see that we're trending away from what the founders were establishing, and we're trending away, or we're trending towards what they warned about. Ellie? And then
in teaching morality and taking prayer out of schools, I think it's mindful to note when our forefathers established the separation of church and state, the intent was not to keep the church out of the state, it was to keep the state out of the affairs of the church.
And those are the words of Thomas Jefferson.
And there's a real confusion about that today.
Great confusion. So Thomas Jefferson, in that letter that I referenced that he wrote, and then he said, no, I need to just deliver this. It was to a large Baptist congregation in Danbury, Connecticut. And he travels to Danbury, Connecticut, in that famous quote, separation of church and state. Most people think, because we haven't earned knowledge, most people think that, oh, that must be in the Constitution. No, it was in a letter that he wrote to a church. And his reference of separation of church and state was in response to the letter that the church congregation sent to him, which basically was saying, hey, listen to government. It's not going to come in here and tell us what we can and can't do in our church, right? And it's exactly what you said. Thomas Jefferson was going to them and saying, I'm willing to travel all the way to Danbury to ensure you that's exactly not what's going to take place. Exactly not what's going to take place. Now, whether we have prayer in school and whatnot, that's a whole different conversation. However, I look at it and I say, whether or not it's in school, and right now it's not, puts all the more responsibility where it should be in the first place, which is here in our church communities. It's not the role of the teacher. I want my kids' teachers to teach them math and science and grammar. And then I want them how to think in abstract ways. Okay? And if I'm able to put them into a parochial system that has religion as well too, that's great. But when they're there, boy, I would love our teachers to have the opportunity to actually teach instead of be parent, counselor, security guard, everything else that they have to do right now. And if they could just teach math, science, grammar, isn't that a notion, right? How to compose a letter, oh my God, it's antiquated, right? Then history, I would be ecstatic. And you know what? It's our responsibility in our faith-based communities to get back to what our core role is, which is to teach morality to our people and then support them in the pursuit of morality in their homes. Right? Somewhere along the way, because society was offering almost a get-out-of-jail-free card for a long time in our nation, because there was this prevalent overlying experience of Judeo-Christian morality and ethics which existed in society, whether it was titled that way or not. Right? There was a general moral standard that existed. Not everybody lived up to it. There were things that were going on that were very immoral, of course, but society still recognized it as taboo, at least. Right? That doesn't exist anymore. The only thing that's taboo now is saying that you wish there was morality. That's what's taboo now, right? And so all the more important for us in our church communities to get back to basics, like we were speaking about in Bible study today. To get back to basics, to begin teaching once again core general morality. I hear the confessions of our teenagers, and it's heartbreaking because you look at a developing mind and personality that's received almost no moral guidance, has no clue general notions of right and wrong when it comes to morality. No clue. Never been taught. Never been taught. It's our job. It's our job. I want the teachers to teach math and grammar. Let us work with the morality part of the equation. Seth.
I like what you said with that, because whenever we get into that conversation about the idea of teachers kind of getting involved in that very early, you end up with that fuzzy area where it's like, well, what's the qualification? What is it they would be teaching? I know that my coworkers who run the FCA, a couple of them have very fuzzy theology. And the stuff they're saying is not stuff that is sound. It's not good basis for a religious doctrine. And that goes back to what you're saying about let the teachers teach what they're supposed to teach.
Yeah.
Rather than being about a confrontation of morality, it's more of a practicality of who's qualified. But what I was originally really thinking of was a response to the comments and questions about democracy and the influence on morality over time. What it really reminds me of is this old Platonic Aristotelian idea that democracy has an intrinsic weakness, that it selects for those who are good at running for office rather than those who are intrinsically moral. And so you end up with this situation over time where, kind of what Plato said about what would happen with, in the Republic, it can only last for a few generations. Right. You've got this situation where, because of the way democracy works, you're not selecting the best. And it's this safeguard that as the citizenry, you have to take it upon yourself to remain educated, to preserve it. It's not something that the government itself can do.
So there's actual responsibility amongst the citizenry to participate in the experience of society, right? I'm reminded of, and I'll paraphrase, the quote by Winston Churchill when he says, "The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter." Right? The theory of democracy, you can't argue against. It's great. But the experience of it, when you have a populace that doesn't take any responsibility and invest themselves in it, that's scary. That's scary. And we're seeing more and more of that, I think. Maybe one last question before we close, Mike?
It's really interesting. I'm glad I came because I do teach ethics.
Yeah.
And I teach it for CPAs to be. And ethics equals morality.
Isn't that what the E in
Yeah.
1040 EZ means? Ethics?
Yeah.
Ethics designer or something like that?
So it's a struggle because I'm in a secular world, in the university setting, I have to be careful. So one of the things I bring up is I bring up pictures of me and my sons on Holy Friday and Holy Saturday. And I have to tell the class because I have Muslims in there, I have Hindus,
Sure.
Buddhists. I said, I'm not trying to influence you in my faith, but this is what influences me.
Yeah.
So you said it right. It's our responsibility to teach our children ethics.
Absolutely.
You know, it's more the parents' responsibility
Thank you.
than it is even yours.
Absolutely.
We have
Church is here to support the first church, which is in the home.
Yeah. So I could go on and on, but I'm not going to.
Absolutely. George,
By the way, I have
one last
other
quick one.
comment. I have
Yeah.
another comment. Has the Metropolitan given you approval to run for office?
There are canons against that. It's happened in rare occasions, right? Archbishop Makarios of Cyprus became the president of Cyprus for, I think it was around 2 years or so. I've been to his tomb, but it's
He
not.
was almost
it's
assassinated.
George, you have one last quick one?
Yeah, one last question. Well, morality depends how we respond to those who violate morality. For example, Thomas Jefferson is Barbary Coast War in 1801. He went to war against the Muslims because of what they were doing. And that's in response to what he considered was immoral. So it's okay to go to the war to fight morality or to protect morality.
Well, you're opening up a significant but very large conversation that can't be just answered. What I can say is the church's response to those in war. We look throughout history and we see that when what we might term as a righteous cause, World War II, Greek War of Independence, there's multiple examples, that the church has supported as a whole the individuals that are in that conflict. I'll give you an example. Even on Mount Athos, the historic monastic region in northeastern Greece, at one of the coastal monasteries, they built barracks to house soldiers that were in transport and to store weapons as they were going back and forth to battlefields across the region. And so that shows a support, not an endorsement of war, however, a support of individuals who are fighting for a righteous cause. So it's, I wouldn't even term it as a gray area. It's not black and white, but I wouldn't even term it as a gray area. I would point to say that the church's role as a hospital is for those who struggle, right? For those who struggle and those who are injured somehow in their soul. And we can't exempt some who are injured or some who are in need because of a stance on war or so on and so forth. It's always to engage the individual that's in need. And the church has done that in times of war as well too. And there's other examples that we can show more poignant involvement and less and things like that. But I'd say that's a general answer.
And whether you're a Jew, a Muslim, or a Christian, we all believe in the same God. It's not, I mean, maybe they have it wrong on parts of it, but we all believe in the same God.
I'll tell you, I had a good conversation, and we'll close with this. I had a good conversation when I was a younger man with an older priest, and I asked a similar question. I said, it was before I ever went to seminary, and I said, you know, where I grew up, I didn't have any Orthodox peers, friends, none. People around me were a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of everything, and who knows what they were. I said, how do we reconcile that? So in the end, are they not going to get in, or I mean, how? And the old priest gave me a great answer, and I'll share it with you. He said, we don't know. He said, all that we know is that God will judge everyone based upon what they did with what they were given. That's it. And so, look at the circumstances of every individual's life. Look at all of their baggage that they had thrown on them and that they took on themselves. And try to equalize that with the way in which they lived their life, in terms of religion, in terms of morality, so on and so forth. And my mind starts to spin, and then I find peace because I realize that it's not my job to figure that out. God's the judge, not me. I don't have the capacity to do it, and neither does anyone else. But God does, and I trust, and I put all of my hope and investment in His love and His mercy, because I know I've been given a lot, and I sadly say I haven't done enough with it. And so I'm going to trust in His mercy and just keep trying to do the best I can every day. And for everybody else out there, no matter who they are or what they are or what they're doing, we pray for them in the Divine Liturgy. And I pray for them in my individual prayer life as well too, as individuals and groupings as well. And our patron saint, St. Basil the Great, his younger brother, St. Gregory of Nyssa, has a teaching that wasn't universally accepted by the Church called the reconciliation of all things, where he essentially states that God is so loving and so merciful that He won't stand for anyone to be separated from Him for all of eternity. He'll find a way that we don't understand for everybody to get in. Right? The Church never universally accepted that. I remember coming home after my first year of seminary, taking patrology where you learn this, and my parish priest, we were talking, and he said, hey, what do you think about St. Gregory of Nyssa, reconciliation line? Everybody gets in. I paused, I said, I'm going to try to live my life like it's not true, but I'm going to hope that it is. Right? And that's that.
But I differ a little bit that the Muslim God is the same, because based on what you just said, an all-loving God, and based on personal experience.
The word love doesn't exist in the Quran. It's a very, very different thing. They would Muslims use the term people of the book, referring to Jews, Christians, and Muslims as having the same root experience, ultimately in Abraham and back. However, outside of academic circles, if you just look at history and practical experience in the world today, it's tough to reconcile. Let's close with prayer. Through the prayers of our holy community, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy upon us and save us. Amen. God bless everyone. Drive safe.
Thank you. You too. Get home.